Okay, there we are. Now we're recording. So good morning, everyone. Happy June 2nd. And I think it's going to be a sunny, great day. So that's amazing. Welcome to our talent series session, Inclusion in Action and Discover Your Untapped Diversity. Today we have Mike Kohler, very skilled in this topic, and we're super excited to have him today at our talent series. Mike Kohler is the training coordinator of Elevate Training, a Larimer County Economic and Workforce Development Program. He also teaches graduate level strategic communications for Purdue University. In both roles, Mike has developed and taught an approach to inclusion and diversity that aligns with business needs. No politics, no moralizing, just common sense practices that also happen to make good business sense. Here's Mike Kohler.
Oh, I'm the one in the Hollywood Squares waving at you. Before I default to calling up a PowerPoint, don't worry, it won't be death by PowerPoint. There will be no reading involved here, but there will be a little bit of storytelling. I'm so pleased to see the kind of variety that we have as far as participants today, because it sort of illustrates a point I will be making about this topic, and that is that there is diversity to discover if we have our radar set for that in any and all of our organizations. And it's also a delight to see familiar names and faces, but great to get to know people who are new to me. So thank you all for being the early birds. We'll probably have others check in as we get underway here, because quite a number of people showed up. But I can tell you I'm very passionate about this topic, and that if the total audience was 2, I would give just as much energy and passion to it as if there were 52. So off we go. I will now call up the material that I will cover along the way. And so forgive me as I stop my video, but we don't need to see me the whole time. I'll be returning to you later. And I will call up today's topic. Okay, let me find it here. Oh, hold on. It says my screen sharing is paused, so I will stop the share. Hold on just a moment. I want to make sure that my presentation is ready to go. There it is. My bad. And back to screen share time. There we go. Now do we see it on the screen? I think we do. Tracy, I'll use you as my litmus test. Do we see inclusion in action up there?
Yes, we do.
Ta-da, off we go. The point of this, as Yvonne pointed out in the introduction, is that this is a take, if you will, on DE&I that I consider supplemental to DE&I. It isn't a contrast or a contradiction of formal DE&I programs. In fact, I'm a beneficiary of one from many, many years ago. But this is just a look at the subject generally applied to our modern workplace norms and conditions and so forth. So this has to do with inclusive business practices. And so I'll be talking about some conceptual things, but also translate it to how do we put things into practice in our respective organizations. Starting with defeating a few myths about inclusion that some of which I find, well, interesting from my perspective, because the very first one, that enlightenment is somehow like in the form of woke, which gets a bad rap because it's been hijacked quite a bit, but that woke might be new when it's not new. Because for me, this type of cultural enlightenment dates back some 45 years or more. So not new to me. Some have the notion that DE&I is related to some formal top-down imposed institutional program for organizations. And that can be true some of the time. There are plenty of really strong, well done, formal programs, but this presentation is about something more informal that is involved in everyday business practices. So DE&I as a formal program, not necessarily, but it can be. And then finally, there's a perception by some that DE&I might be politically tinged, and some people even have a little bit of a fear factor about it, and that's a shame, because the fallacy that some people have is that, oh, there's going to be something forced on us, or that there's going to be finger wagging, moralizing about specific political matters, and that really is unfair to the DE&I programs, because it's too narrow. And in fact, I think some could make a valid case that when certain marginalized populations, for example, are highlighted with one initiative or another, that, oh, we're being exclusive to the others. And so today, this approach that I'm going to share with you it does not intend to dilute the subject to something not really all that meaningful. In fact, as a believer in a longtime believer in incrementalism and leadership from the heart of organizations, not necessarily top down, that I'll be making the case that one person or small groups of people can make a big difference. And at each of us, because my contention is that each of us, because I've seen the evidence and experienced it myself, that people can make a difference when they feel empowered to speak up and do something to correct injustices, even, which is a little dramatic, because sometimes it's just process changes, policy changes, or practices that need changing in an organization. And these 3 Ps, these are the areas where we can all make a difference, because a recent article in the local newspaper highlighted the city's efforts around DE&I, but a number of community activists spoke out that, hey, the words, the panels, presentations like mine, what have you, that the talking about it is fine, but the doing comes in the form of investing a little bit of energy and elbow grease into making changes that are actually meaningful. And it comes in these 3 areas. So I'll cover some examples in each of the 3 areas that may just make sense to you. Because my contention is that when we when we practice inclusion as a leadership skill, that the result of it will be that we will bring out diversity that already exists in every organization. Okay, now not every kind of diversity, because there are many different forms of it. And let's face it, especially for those of us who are Fort Collins based, it was quite a culture shock for me and my wife when we moved to Fort Collins, and thinking that, well, it's a college town, it will be very diverse. And we moved from a very diverse community. And so it's been kind of a surprise that it's really the least diverse, racially diverse at least, community that we've ever lived in. And so I guess my encouragement would be to look at other types of diversity that I'll get to in just a little bit. But first, I want to do a little role play with everyone here. And here are the roles that we will have in this role play. And this exercise is much easier when it's done in person, in workshop mode, but we'll try it here virtually. That we all are part of a special committee for DE&I for a very large organization. And as members of this DE&I Council, we are planning a DE&I Day that's coming up for our organization. My specific responsibility today is to provide you with a pair of candidates to be guest speaker for our upcoming DE&I Day. Okay, so that's what we're charged with. And so I'm going to bring up the photographs that the two have shared with us, and then I'll read you their biographical sketches. Okay, so here are the two. Now, the first candidate I want to tell you about teaches organizational culture and is a published author. He was honored with a National Vision Award for commitment to diversity. He founded a media outlet for use by marginalized populations in the community, as well as a cultural growth group for dialogue around race relations. The second candidate is an entrepreneur who leads a local business. His business is committed to helping local youth with their career pathways. So, just as your initial reaction, perhaps you could type into chat which candidate that, just from what you've heard and seen so far, which candidate may be best qualified for our guest speaker role for our DE&I Day. So you want to type that in chat, who you think might be best qualified, or if anyone would like to unmute and so give some feedback about who might be best qualified.
Mike, there is a comment in the chat. Could you define DE&I?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion is how it's commonly defined. So any guesses or reactions to these candidates who we might choose for our DE&I guest speaker? So without me being able to see the chat, or are there?
Tell you a little bit. So comments are like, the first seems to have a much more diverse background. The first one, the author first. I would say based on his professional journey, the teacher. Someone, Julie said, maybe we need a local person. And I hear how successful the first person is in initiatives. So
very good. Okay.
Great
well, these are great, great reactions. And if I was on the committee, yeah, I'd be feeling the same way. And you could be forgiven if you might have guessed that the person on the left was indeed that person I was describing with the first bio. But note this, that I didn't say the person on the left, but it would be reasonable to assume that, because we may have an implicit bias, because don't we read from left to right typically, and that when I mentioned the first candidate whose bio that I read, assumed that it was the person on the left. And there may have been other reasons that may have made you think that, wow, that bio must pertain to that person, but it doesn't. Because what I was reading were two accurate bio sketches. Some of you may know, by the way, Jamal Skinner on the left. And so, and believe me, the answer to the question, which of these two people would be best qualified to be guest speaker for DE&I Day, the answer is both or neither. That neither one necessarily is more qualified than the other, because what I was reading, the bio sketch for that first person were things pertaining to my professional and life experience. And all I did was watered down Jamal's to just state a couple of basic facts that are true about him, but it didn't give enough credit, didn't explain as much detail. But it's understandable that, because look, and I've gotten double takes before. when I have showed up as a panelist for, say, a virtual conference, you can almost see people saying, wait, was this the diversity and inclusion speaker? And not knowing what my background or life experience is, it's understandable that people might make the wrong guess. Because the point I want to make about diversity is that when we look a little deeper and don't rely on implicit biases, which aren't, the thing about bias that sometimes people mistake is that bias itself, implicit bias, is harsh or negative or whatever, and equate it with discrimination or prejudice. And that's not the case. There's an implicit bias we have for the person on the left being first, for example. So it isn't necessarily negative. But when we look a little deeper and understand people's backstories and what their life experience is about, these types of diversity are found in every single one of our organizations. Because no two of us here this morning have the same life experience, for example. So until you know more, then it's not fair to guess at who might be the better qualified. So life experience, I think that type of diversity is something that when we practice leadership as a inclusion, that is, as a leadership skill, that we bring out that kind of diversity in our organizations, okay? While we work on more specific goals in diversity and inclusion, we have those that we can hang our hats on. So inclusion is a leadership skill. Here's my 4-part recipe, if you will, for how to make things happen as inclusive leaders, starting with this very basic thing that each and every one of us, and I suspect that with today's participants, that we already have this as a universal thing that we embrace, that inclusion is something that we don't need a memo prescribing it. We don't need anybody's permission. Every single one of us can simply adopt this as our personal philosophy and the way that we will practice as business professionals. So this should be the easy part. But the not as easy part is the making sure that we work on it, like I've had to for a lifetime, because my background, if you will, those things I read from my bio sketch come from a multicultural program that I attended. My undergraduate work was in a sort of cultural anthropology program called Perspectives on American Culture, that I started at age 24 as a late starting college student, because my upbringing was in a harshly racist environment, and I had the kind of thinking and attitudes and behaviors that you would expect from such an environment. And so when I went to college at age 24 in this multicultural program called Perspectives on American Culture, it not only transformed my life, but saved my life, because I learned as a first thing in the program that all that stinking thinking in my head that I brought to the table from life experience up to that point, those were all learned. And that if those are learned attitudes and behaviors, that they can be unlearned, and that we can learn new ones. And so that strengthened me and grew me as a person, but it takes work. It takes work, because I consider myself a lifelong recovering racist, because we have to practice it till it's second nature. It's a lifetime of work, because racial diversity happens to be my biggest passion, for example. But I know that it will always take work, and that I'm committed to that. And so practicing it till we don't even have to think about it really makes a lot of sense. But then this fourth part of the equation is something that if there is any finger wagging or moralizing to this presentation, it's only this, that once we know this stuff, once we make that conscious decision to be inclusive leaders, then I think we have an obligation to help others get better at it as well. And we're well qualified to do it. So this is a pretty simple formula, but it takes hard work, and we have to stick to it. So now that we've set the stage, let's look at the big picture about workforce engagement in the US to dimension the problem that we're facing just in the workforce generally. Okay, this little boat represents a Gallup survey that was conducted, asking people simply the question, do you feel engaged in your work? And they surveyed more than 50,000 people in the workforce at various levels. And the results were a little disappointing, to say the least. Fewer than a third, that's these red happy rowers in the front of the boat, describe themselves as engaged in their jobs. Around half said they describe themselves as disengaged, and 19% they're ready to jump ship. They said actively disengaged. That was their description. So that's pretty alarming, right? And when you dig deeper into it, in that same survey, the middle group, more than half of those people said we are looking for new jobs, and 3/4 of the actively disengaged people said they were looking for new jobs. These are all pretty disturbing results, right? The most disturbing result in my mind, though, is the ones who aren't looking. If they're if they're actively disengaged, you might as well give them oars rowing the other way. And now the most alarming part of all, this survey is a little old. The results were published in March 2020. Now, was there a little something going on then that, yeah, right. So imagine, do you think the numbers are any better today? Highly unlikely. So you know, chances are the picture is a little worse from that survey. And this survey, this isn't exactly a happy face thing either. The Gallup people, again, surveyed more than 50. They like to do exhaustive surveys and get big samples. They asked more than 50,000 people leaving their organizations, why are you doing it? What's wrong here? So I'm going to show you the top 4 and be thinking about where you think pay ranks for why did people leave. 4th most cited was supervisor. And this wasn't that, when asked to explain it a little bit, it wasn't always, oh, the boss was a jerk. Sometimes yes, but sometimes just the boss wasn't well equipped to be a good leader. So the growth and advancement, these days especially, there's a different interpretation of this, because in the old days, advancement, vertical advancement up the ladder was meaningful for folks. These days, personal growth and development is an expectation of employers. And so a whole different interpretation there. Purpose, people who didn't feel that that their organizations offered them the kind of values and vision and mission that were meaningful to them. This is the, why are we here? What is our purpose, which is a more valuable recruitment strategy to focus on these days. But the number one reason is the saddest of all, lack of appreciation. Lack of appreciation. And when they were asked to explain things, the saddest part was it was things that could be cured so simply with just some behavioral changes, no denting the budget. Things like people saying, I don't think the bosses even knew my name. They didn't give me credit for contributions I was making. They don't know what I did. So lack of appreciation was cited as number one, that sense of belonging, if you will. So several years ago, I was looking at this problem and coined an expression defining employee appreciation in a phrase of 3 total words, 6 total letters. And some of you who have worked with me before know what's coming up here, because as many times as I've offered the chance for people to guess what these 3 words are, nobody ever gets it until they get it. And that is the in on it factor. The most, I guess, the most effective way that that we can practice inclusion is to make sure that everyone feels they are in on it in terms of shaping the values of the organization, that they are actively involved in improving the organization, that they have voice. And so this in on it factor, even though it may seem like a trite little expression, is so hugely important as far as giving people a sense of belonging, that if they don't feel included in on the progress of the organization and achieving the organization's goals and aren't being recognized for it, they'll tune out. And that question that so many employers seem puzzled by these days, because my department is affiliated with the Workforce Center, and we hear from a lot of employers who are looking for, they're posting their jobs with us and so forth, and they're asking, well, where's the loyalty these days? Where's the good work ethic? What they're puzzled about the dynamic in this unusual market. Well, this is the phrase that can really make a huge difference. So based on that, let's look at, I mentioned the 3 Ps of policies, processes, and practices. Well, let's look at a policy matter. And this one, I'm going to use this metaphor of the waterfall and invite you for a moment to consider, even with your eyes closed, which could be kind of dangerous, I'm going to ask you to think about a time when you're at your favorite waterfall. And most people, not everyone, but most people have a favorite. Mine, oddly enough, is in Minnesota, of all places, and I'm going up there this weekend. I want you to think about, put yourself there in that moment and think about the multi-sensory experience that you have there, the different senses that are activated. And if any of you would like to unmute and share some of that experience, what senses are activated for you?
Feel a cool spray.
Ooh, yeah, the feeling of you get the mist or even splashes from it. Yeah, the feel of it. Others?
I would add, I think the sound is loud and you get a sense of the power of water.
Thank you. Okay. We didn't set this up, I promise you. Typically, that one is going to come up. It happens to be my favorite. That the audio part, where the sound of it is really compelling. It kind of draws you closer. Going back to the person who I think it was Julie who cited the feel of it, you almost want to get in it, right? I mean, you're ready to get in there, but that multi-sensory experience relates to communication in the organization and what I call communication cascade. That when the leadership of the organization communicate consistently and across all functional areas. And because top-down communication gets a bad rap, that in and of itself, top-down has some bad connotation, but people look to leadership to share vision and direction and so forth. And so when that information comes down to the workforce with equal force and consistently across all functional areas, that bubbling up effect at the bottom, those are the great ideas coming out of the workforce. People who want to receive and respond to the messaging from top leadership. So that's why I encourage, and I have separate workshops and teaching that I do around various means of making this happen. But it comes down to this policy decision at the top, because there's a transparency gap that can happen. And I'm going to show you a simplified org chart with just a couple of direct reports to the CEO. So don't be put off by the simplicity of the org chart. But the gap happens when the CEO or owner who has a vision, even though there are lots of consulting organizations that like to come in and do team bonding and all kinds of work around vision, developing vision statements and make up posters and t-shirts and what have you. If you really want to know what the vision for the organization is, I would suggest that asking the top person who has that ultimate accountability and responsibility for it, they have a vision. But too often, and I've personally observed this and worked with organizations who unfortunately don't hold all of the direct reports accountable for communicating the vision, mission, and values of the organization and lots of other information to the frontline troops. Instead, they sometimes default to, well, since it's a people issue, hey, HR, put out something, make up some posters or do a memo or what have you. Or they relegate it to, if it's a large enough organizations, to have marketing and communications people to wordsmiths and stuff. And so when that just perpetuates the silo factor that then the other functional direct reports just go back to their respective sandboxes and interpret things in their own way. And those are just such huge wasted opportunities when the possibility is there for brand evangelism from the direct reports in all functional areas when there is accountability assigned to it. So as a policy matter, I just strongly recommend, as the best boss I ever had, in fact, the best CEO I ever served, not surprisingly, a woman leader with a strong, she had been the CFO and graduated to the big chair with doubters who thought she might be efficiency minded, and instead she was human relations minded, and I helped in that regard. But she included accountability in our performance reviews for all of her direct reports, even tying it to compensation. And believe me, when you tie stuff to compensation for leadership level people, gee, amazing how things get done. But enlisting direct reports and their direct reports and so on as evangelists of the message consistently, that's when you get great traction and highly engaged employees. And you don't give people a pass because say there might be somebody who's the more introverted type and not a pep rally cheerleader type. No, nobody gets a pass. Nobody in leadership should get a pass on effectively conveying consistent messaging from the top. So that's a policy matter that can be put into effect. And the more we push for that, the better off we'll be. Here's the formula I want to share with you for building engaged teams when we're communicating that way to our organizations. Starts with being other-centric in this way, in these 4 steps. First, being a culture that asks people for their ideas all the time on all topics. That is the kind of openness and transparency that encourages people to speak up, give voice all the time on all topics, not just when we in leadership need something or have a tough topic to deal with. If we have the kind of culture where we're always asking for input, then it's not a shock when we have maybe a tougher policy or process change to implement. When we do that, I suggest we use brainstorming rules that look, we're going to ask everybody for input, and there are no bad ideas. That's one of the rules of brainstorming. We take all that people have to share, synthesize all that, and arrive at good solutions based on all the input that we gather. Then thanking people. Now you might think this is well, duh, it goes without saying. Of course, we would say thanks, but thanking the right way with very specific, timely feedback about what we're thanking people for, and thanking them the way that they appreciate it most. Okay, some people don't need a public display of affection, crown on their head or anything like that. Just a handwritten note or a nice one-to-one conversation is much more meaningful. And then finally, crediting others. All of us gathered today who are in leadership roles in our organizations, I think there is probably pretty strong consensus agreement on this, that the higher ups, top leadership in organizations, get more than their fair share of acknowledgement or recognition anyway, right? So why not, when there are great ideas or new policies or processes to implement, why not use this model of asking for all the input and then credit that process, credit the organization, not just giving credit to top brass, like, oh, brilliance is confined to the boardroom, which it decidedly is not. I think we all know. So for those of us who might be in positions that are not at the top of the food chain, if you will, or whatever leadership role we're in, especially for those of you who are from the HR world, my heart goes out to you, because sometimes we're it's perceived that, well, HR people can work miracles on their own, and I suggest that that allyship, looking for receptive, willing, compliant partners throughout the workforce, they're out there. If we just have our radar set for not prying into their personal lives, but just being alert to what people talk about, the things that are of interest to them. And so some of those factors I have on the screen, like, whoa, you might resist, talk about church stuff or things like that. No, it's more the listening for things, not probing for things. Because when you know what makes people tick, you can get more closely in touch with them and recruit them as allies. Because believe me, as I have experienced in large corporations where I've served, that when you have a network of allies, they're out there. There's receptivity to it. People, it's that in on it factor. You'll find people who want to help. You don't have to go it alone, is the bottom line. Here's an example. If you recognize this person on the screen, this was from the good old days of my work with couple different large cable broadband companies. This person, they used to string cable over utility poles and that sort of thing. And so when you look at this, you might think of that technician, but it makes me think of government relations. What? Has Mike had too much coffee? What's he talking about? It reminds me of my old friend, a construction crew chief named Ziggy, who as crew chief in those days, when crews were working in a neighborhood, the crew chief would be the one who was able to select the audio entertainment that would come blaring out from their truck and so forth while they did their work. And Ziggy's choice, much to the dismay of the crew, was political talk radio. You know, so not music, but talk radio. Not only political talk radio, but the kind of political talk radio that didn't necessarily align with my views and beliefs about politics. But what I knew about Ziggy was that he was an avid follower of politics, was very interested in it, and enjoyed it. And he and I could disagree all day long about some things, but he was my one of my most effective allies when I needed a letter writing campaign. I could count on him for that. When there was going to be a system visit by an elected official or something like that, he was ready to rally the troops and that sort of thing, and all for the asking, because I knew that was in his wheelhouse. It was his avocation, and so he was always glad to be of service. And you know, and so it's allies like that that we can find out there if we just are in touch with who they are and what makes them tick. So going back to inclusion as a leadership skill, and I already went through the formula that being other-centric about inclusion involves this. I mentioned the asking everyone for their ideas, but when it comes to inclusion specifically, in the absence of formal DE&I, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, that sometimes get a bad rap because people thinking they're, I don't know, forced down on them or whatever. Informally, we can ask people for ideas about inclusion. And when we spot those good ideas and dialogue around the subject, let's recognize and reward those models of inclusive leadership. So I'm going to show you some examples that I'm an anecdote collector. And so I like to, when I hear about good stuff going on, I like to collect those and share them. And I'd love to collect more from you. So here are some that I've either observed or heard about or experienced myself. There's a local company that will not adjourn a meeting where decisions have been made or a direction is being taken until each person has weighed in with a thumbs up or thumbs down. That is, there is safety in it, and they're expected to express their true feelings about the matter, so that there isn't the retreating to our silos and then having our own take and just going along to get along during meeting time. So, you know, preventing sidebar activity. Inviting new ideas during interviewing and onboarding. There are some tips in our skills-based hiring practices modules in Elevate that have some work around this sort of thing. And so a cool thing about the hiring process, if we are sending signals to those potential new hires that we're this kind of organization, the in today's market, where job seekers are studying us, not vice versa, like it used to be. Signals like that are very important. I mentioned earlier performance metrics and even compensation incentives that reward inclusive practices. Book clubs and lunch and learns are fantastic ideas. Sometimes there's a caution I have about discussion groups, sometimes known as employee resource groups or whatever expression you may have in your own organization. The only caution I would say about it is to avoid what I just saw happen to Google this morning. Google is a massively large organization and perceived by many as sort of left tilted or whatever. And they ran into trouble because they didn't set parameters well. They empowered discussion groups, but the discussion groups in this case, and I just read about in the Washington Post this morning, felt they had authority and planned to bring in speakers on some controversial things that, wow, met with opposition. And so there was turmoil in the organization because, well, they weren't clear about the expectations. And as we all know, as Brene Brown says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So just be clear about parameters, but otherwise, I know from personal experience, having formed such a group, that that if the expectations are managed correctly, they can be fantastic. Now, I'm going to go to number 6. There's a redacted application process that I'm proud of the fact that my own department and several employers now that we've shared it with use this approach, where people not involved in the interviewing first redact out all of the personal identifiers, and therefore applicants are being judged based on their qualifications and skills and competencies that they bring to the table. I like this one that I just heard this one the other day. A colleague of mine reported that their daughter received a nice little commendation at school when they were asking students to talk about what inclusion means to them. And this 8-year-old named Lily said, "I show inclusion by helping people not feel left out." Now, you know what? There may be some wordsmiths among us here today, but it really can't get better than that. So that I just thought that was an excellent example from an 8-year-old. So if we can do half as well as Lily did. And then I heard about an organization, the large Cisco organization, a huge organization nationally, has what they call sponsors, but I think that sounds a little paternalistic if you ask me, who look for examples of inclusive practices and reward those. Another organization, though, a smaller one, closer to home, calls them inclusion scouts, and that is they sort of have some fun with it. Who can we spot displaying these good examples of inclusion? So, as we approach the end of our chat, I mentioned that I would share with you an example of how one person can make a difference. And so I have a story to share from personal experience about that. It's a story that I'm involved in, and it's how one person made a big difference, and it really involves all 3 of these P's. So I'm going to stop the share and join you in the Hollywood Squares here. because I sort of want a personal approach to sharing this. I remember this story so vividly as happening on an average Wednesday afternoon. Quite a number of years ago, I was with a large broadband company, an employee headcount of roughly 1,350 people or so. And I was the person in charge of all communications, including internal communications, but I was responsible as well for public relations and issues related to maybe an inflamed or customer relations situation. And so as a practice, I deputized employees in all functional areas and educated them all about the need to be alert to anything that could possibly be a public relations or inflamed customer relations situation. So with that context, I received a call mid-afternoon on a Wednesday from a dispatcher who was concerned about directions she had just given to a pair of technicians in the field that day. Now, it was a pair of technicians doing trouble calls, and the pairing was because there was an experienced, highly skilled supervisor breaking in a new hire trainee, okay? And it wasn't so much the specific task that the dispatcher gave them, but the unusual request from the customer. The customer specified that only a white male technician would be welcome in their home. So, not surprisingly, one of the two technicians was a Black man. And also not surprisingly, it was the highly skilled supervisor. Okay. Now on the spot, because he was empowered to do so, he thought it through and had a decision to make. And he had heard the old maxim that we all know is not true, that the customer is always right. And based on that, he thought, well, okay, I'll send in the trainee to do, it was a routine fix-up, if you will, that the trainee went in and performed, came back out, solved the problem, the trainee got the experience, the customer was happy, everything, happy ending, right? All good? Not all good, not at all. Not with the dispatcher, affectionately known by the technicians as Mean Jean. She wasn't really mean, but if you've ever been around a service center, sometimes the dispatchers have to be a little tough. But Mean Jean, who was a 40-something white woman, it just wasn't sitting right with her. And she had no hesitation to let me know about it, because the type of culture that we had said that she was empowered to speak up and say what was on her mind. I thanked her for that and immediately went and had a chat with my boss for about 10 minutes. And as luck would have it, or fate, the following morning was on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock at the Georgetown Club offsite was our monthly all management meeting of some 90 to 100 people. And at the start of the meeting, I was asked by the CEO to make this announcement, that effective immediately, we will no longer honor any bias-based request from customers. And when I finished that up by saying, and if they don't like that, that's a piece of business we just don't need. If you've never personally experienced a spontaneous standing ovation, not a polite rotary type, but a spontaneous standing ovation, people high-fiving and celebrating and jubilant. And the supervisor who had made that decision out in the field came up and began to thank me for making the announcement. And I said, wait, you can go thank Mean Jean, because she knew that that just wasn't right. And she felt she could make a difference and did, because you can only imagine how that spread like wildfire to 1,350 people.
Yes.
Said, okay, this is what we stand for. And so that has stuck with me forever. It just
DJ
reinforced
Trip
where I had lived.
19@gmail.com.
Oh,
DJTRIP19@gmail.com.
okay, Deb, sorry to interrupt. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you to
Okay.
illustrate that one person, when there's empowerment to do so, can get something done in those 3 Ps if we just make the conditions right for it. And in my mind, that's the ultimate
8974.
in inclusion. So on that note, I will surrender the floor, and I will
I am wanting
thank
to
Yvonne for
delete
inviting
my
me.
account.
And I thank all of you for attending, because it's such a joy to be with you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mike. So Deb, I don't know if you can hear us, but your microphone is on.
You should be able to mute her, Yvonne, if you click up on her box.
Oh, yes. Oh, thank you. I
Yes.
did that. Yay. I forget I have all that power. Thank you so much. So thank you all. Thank you all for joining us today. I have totally inspired and have some new ideas and feel like I can make a difference as well. And so appreciate Mike's approach, and I appreciate this conversation. It's important to continue to have these sorts of conversations all the time. So I'm glad we added Mike in this conversation to the talent series. We have one more for our spring session, and it is on June 22nd, and it's actually in person at New Works Mechanical, a plumbing company. And if you're a business that is interested in having students host them for job shadows, job tours, learning experiences about your business, and you're not sure how to do that, like how would I have high school students at my business? How would I have middle schoolers at my business? Travis Slisher at Newark's has got a really great program for students and their experience. And so we're actually going to be like students experiencing that. And then we'll spend some time helping you figure out how to maybe do that for your business. We really, really want more work-based learning opportunities for kids and for children and their parents to understand career pathways and all the businesses in our communities, and not everybody's a doctor, a nurse, or a fireman. That there's all kinds of opportunities for students. So love for you to do that. And then our talent series takes a break because you'll all be doing your summer fun. And I hope that you do a lot of summer fun. And we'll be starting again in September. And we have wonderful speakers. Carl, who's on our session today, will be presenting for us as well. He's going to do one on how to have hybrid meetings. Now I'm hearing that from people. We were in person, and then we were Zoom, and now we're Zooming in person. And how the heck do you engage both of those audiences at the same time? So we also would like some people at the chamber to be the audience here at the chamber. So if you're interested in that, when the dates come out, we would love for you to let me know and join that. So I have a whole series planned with all kinds of different speakers. They'll be coming out in August. It's the same format, Zoom, unless you're at Carl's event, and 1 hour quick lunch and learn type brown bag breakfast conversations pretty much every week, except for the week of the workforce symposium that the workforce systems in both Weld and Larimer put together at Ames Community College on September 29th. I have the right date, right, Mike? So we'll give you
September 27th.
27th, September 27th.
27th.
Sorry about that. So we have some giving you some time off for the summer, and then we'll start up again with some great topics. If you have topic ideas or you have a presentation you would love to make and in this space as well, please reach out to me, ymyers@fcchamber.org. If you can't remember that, go to the website and you'll find my picture and you'll find that as well. So thank you for joining us today. We will send this out, all the slides you'll get and the recording, if there's other folks in your business or other people you'd love to share this conversation with. So I hope you have a wonderful sunny spring day. I think it's going to be that for you. We thank Mike Kohler for all of his talent and sharing and his kind heart around this topic. I'm very inspired today. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
See you soon, Carl.